Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Serena Sohal. I'm the Employer and Alumni Liaison from the Career Center at York University, and I would like to welcome you to the Career Conversation panel, Leveraging Your Social Science and Humanities PhD Outside of Academia. This event is part of the Career Conversation series and is co-hosted by the Faculty of Graduate Studies, so we'd like to thank them very much for their partnership in this event. The purpose of this event is to provide you an opportunity to explore careers outside of academia. Our moderator and panelists today are all PhD graduates from York University and have a ton of career advice and insights to share. We will begin with a 1-hour discussion where our moderator will ask our panelists questions about their role and career journey. In the second hour, we will take questions from the audience. The Q&A section can be found at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to add any questions into the Q&A section throughout the event. We will make note of them and address them during the second hour. When you do add your questions, please let us know if your question is open to all panelists or if it's for someone in particular. For our panelists, if you do see any questions that are addressed to you, feel free to respond back to the attendees through the Q&A, but no pressure, as we will address all the unanswered questions after 3 p.m. So before moving forward, we'd like to launch a poll to get a better idea of what you are hoping to gain from today's event. Excellent, thank you so much. Fantastic. So seems to be a decent balance between career journey, but a lot of you are here for job search tips for PhDs. So we'll definitely make sure that we touch upon all of these things, and we'll ask our speakers to really focus on that area for our attendees today. So a few reminders before we begin. We are also joined here today by my colleague Susan Pogue from the Career Center and Kim McIntyre from FGS. Now the chat function in this webinar is disabled, but we would like to request that if you can add all questions that you have for the Career Center or FGS into the Q&A section as well, and just let us know that it's for those departments. This event is being recorded. Once the recordings become available, hopefully within the next week, we will send all of the attendees the link. So feel free to rewatch it. Feel free to share it with others as well. And last but not least, we will be sharing a survey with you after today's event. It's a very quick survey, and we would greatly appreciate your feedback so we can continue to host and improve events like this. So I'd now like to introduce our moderator for this afternoon, Carolyn Steele.
Good afternoon, all, and thank you for joining us. I'm delighted to introduce our panel for this afternoon, and they represent a nice cross-section of both fields and career directions, so there should be a nice broad range here for you. First of all, I'd like to thank Visha Gandhi, who has a PhD in English Language and Literature and is now a manager of public information at the Toronto Energy Board. Nguyen has a PhD in political science and public policy administration. She is now manager of government relationships at Shaw Communications. Craig Roxborough, PhD in philosophy, is an old-time vet of career conversation panels, is now manager of policy in the policy department at the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario. And Raphael Costa, PhD in Contemporary European History, Municipal Governance, and Economic Development, is a manager of Small Business and Entrepreneurship, Economics, and Cultural Development. So we'll start off with some general questions for the panel, which I will initiate. This will go on for about an hour, and then we'll open the floor up to the questions from the audience. So for those of you who are in the audience, as Serena was saying, as a speakers are speaking, if questions come to you based on what they're saying, jot it into the Q&A at the bottom, and we can get back to it when we open up the panel to the audience. So to begin, could each of the panelists please take a couple of minutes to introduce yourselves, a couple of minutes, and briefly tell us about your role and your key responsibilities within your current organization, and how has your role, organization, or industry changed during the pandemic? So Vishna, let's begin with you.
Sure. Oh, actually, it's Visha, just to let you know.
Visha.
Yeah, that's it. That's okay. So my name is Dr. Visha Gandhi. I'm a manager in public information at the Ontario Energy Board. It is a government agency in the provincial government. I'm also on the board of directors of an HIV/AIDS nonprofit, which is some of my volunteer work. So right now I'm a people leader. I have a staff of 8. I manage what's called a public information center. So that's correspondence and consumer relations department. So the OEB, or Ontario Energy Board, mostly deals with energy regulations. So we regulate the energy sector when it comes to utilities, home hydro, natural gas. And so my key responsibilities are managing and mentoring my staff, meeting service level agreements as they come out in the organization's scorecard, which is reported to the government. I also report and analyze consumer inquiries. So, I'll get responses from or inquiries from VPs and senior management asking what people are asking about. And then intake for industry inquiries when it comes to energy regulation. So that's some of my key responsibilities. In terms of the pandemic, it's been really surprising in some ways. So we're all currently working from home, although as energy regulators, we are considered an essential service, but we are all working from home. There have been lots of technological advancements that the OEB has gone through, like we, got MS Teams, other types of collaboration type technologies that have been implemented to the entire organization. When it comes to staff, I'm finding that people are actually more productive, more engaged working from home, which is a little surprising. In a consumer relations department, it can be a little tough because it's such a collaborative environment. People like to sort of share ideas and connect with one another. So that has been a challenge to keep that sort of friendly, fun, sort of environment for the team. But overall, people have been connecting pretty well.
Mai, could you go next?
Of course. Hi, my name is Nguyen, and I'm the Manager of Government Relations at Shaw Communications and Freedom Mobile. Shaw had purchased Freedom Mobile in 2016 when it was Wind, and we rebranded it Freedom Mobile. So if anybody's a Freedom Mobile subscriber, thank you. So my role is I manage, create, and implement all the government relations and interactions in Ontario for the business. I deal with all 3 levels of government, such as anywhere from understanding regulations, government regulations, to getting permitting from municipal governments so that we can continue to build our network. And of course, managing simple day-to-day policies. Sometimes we work with the OEB, for example, on pole attachments. So I deal with all 3 levels of government in different aspects of the business and really try to create the narrative and partner with governments so that we can build the infrastructure and of course invest in the communities we work for or work with. During the pandemic, that really shifted because the government dictated what could stay open and what couldn't. And luckily telecoms is considered an essential service, so we were allowed to stay open and operate. But I found my job became more of getting clarification on the restrictions, and then of course asking for exemptions so that we can continue working, making sure everyone was safe, all of our workers were safe. And it really highlighted my role in the business as we got further into the lockdown, and understanding how government really affects what you can do, especially during the pandemic. But it also raised awareness to how important telecommunications infrastructure is, as everyone continued to work from home and relied on, broadband internet more. And that then really elevated what we do in terms of narrating that importance to government and how we work with government and communities through the pandemic. So that's a little bit of what I do, and that's it.
Thank you, Mai. Craig, sorry, could you take it from there?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Craig Roxborough. I'm the manager of policy at the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario. For those who don't know, the CPSO is the medical regulator in the province. So all physicians who are practicing in the province need to be licensed with our organization. They can't practice unless they have a license with us, and we are responsible for regulating that profession. So my role in the policy department is to lead a team of around 8. We all have graduate degrees or law degrees, and we write the policies that set expectations for physicians. So we focus primarily on issues that are more of a professional nature or an ethical nature. So what their obligations are when accepting new patients, or providing medical assistance in dying, or when recommending complementary or alternative medicine therapies that where the evidence is less clear, and a huge gamut. So we've got about 30 policies that my department oversees, that we're regularly reviewing and updating and developing new policies when issues arise. And that's sort of our portfolio, which means we're providing a ton of advice and guidance to the profession, helping them understand what their expectations are, what their obligations are, how to navigate and work with patients, and what their obligations to patients are. Which means in the context of the pandemic, we have been incredibly busy. The system has completely transformed in a very short period of time. And as Mai was saying, like, the government was making some directives, and everybody needed to figure out what that meant and how they could go ahead doing their jobs. And so we were providing regular guidance to the profession and to patients about how to navigate the new system, what it meant, what expectations were reasonable, where things that used to be okay may not be okay anymore, and how to manage in a completely different environment. And then on top of all of that, as Visha said, move your entire organization virtual, run an entire team virtually, and in my case, onboard new people to the team entirely virtually as well, which is a whole other dynamic. So, so it's been an interesting number of months.
Terrific. And Raphael, I understand there's been a change to your job title.
Oh, yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Raph Costa. I have a PhD in history from York. Yeah, I was fortunate enough to have a couple of retirements in our department right around March 13th, which we might remember. March 12th was the day the pandemic was declared, and I was asked to step into the director role on an acting basis. So I've been there for 7 months or so of the Economic and Cultural Development Department of the city of Vaughan. For those of you who don't know, I mean, we know the city of Vaughan in terms of York's geography is just on the other side of Steeles. The city of Vaughan is a lower tier municipality. So I work for that department, again, in economic development as a profession. What our department does is we deliver services and policy support in small business and entrepreneurship, in general business development, and that includes business retention, expansion, business attraction activities, as well as arts and culture and partnerships. So we have those 4 business units in our department. Functionally speaking, we deal with business advisory services. We do a lot of marketing and education, and we work on larger city building initiatives. For example, the Vaughan Healthcare Precinct, which is next to the Cordalucci Vaughan Hospital at Highway 400 and Major Mackenzie. So we're really engaged in helping our local business community grow, and B, establishing large anchor projects which represent economic opportunities for our city. In terms of how COVID has shifted things, I mean, I'll echo what everyone else said. We went virtually overnight. But what I would say, I think, and I think this is important for this particular context, is that COVID, and the longer it's taking, the more this is becoming true, COVID is really making it clear that in economic development as a profession anyway, the two of the most important skills that we are looking for are the ability to understand and synthesize large amounts of information and then communicate that properly. You know, the business community and employers and employees reach out to the city, regardless of whether or not we are responsible for whatever regulation is coming down the pipe, as Craig said, and ask us, you know, what it means. And we need to be able to, again, understand that quickly and communicate that effectively, which, again, I think in the context of this particular conversation is relevant, since that is by and large the skill set that we are all, that backstopped us all to the end of our degrees.
Thank you very much. So for the next question, Mai, we'll begin with you. Can you share a brief 1 to 2 minute overview of your career story with us, from how you got from being a PhD to where you are now?
Gotta unmute that. If I got $1 for every time I was on mute, I'd be rich. So when I was finishing up my PhD, I thought I need to explore all career options that were available to me with the skill set I developed, of course, over the course of my PhD. And so I started just applying for jobs, policy jobs. I thought I wanted to work in government. I wanted to be a policy advisor and make some policy, make a difference. And I did land a job right after graduating at York Region as a policy advisor. It was a 1-year contract. And it was in the Community and Health Services Department. They said it could become permanent. I was like, great, this is awesome, I have a job. And as I went through it, sometimes you realize you're not a good fit for an organization, especially coming out of a PhD. Your skill set might be a bit different. And so the contract ended, and found myself like, yikes, I'm unemployed at this moment. But I was pulled into a political campaign working on a by-election for a friend who was running. And I will tell you that that was one of the best experiences. As part of my career, you network, you meet tons of people, you learn so many different skills when you're knocking on doors and strangers are closing the doors in your face. You learn all kinds of communication skills. And I worked that campaign for 4 months, woke up every day, did it for 12 hours a day. And as I was there, I was getting noticed by, some of the political staff at Queen's Park. And then when the campaign finished, unfortunately, we lost. But I was offered a job at Queen's Park as a political staff. And I shortly found myself in a minister's office, worked my way up, had lots of stakeholders come lobby me on things. And my advice is, when you have stakeholders in front of you, be nice to every single one of them, because you never know when you're on the other end of that table. And sure enough, one of my stakeholders was Shaw Communications. And then I saw the job come up and I applied. And so here I am today.
That's a great story. Thank you. Craig, how about yours?
1 to 2 minutes is really not fair, Caroline. That's a pretty tight. It's a pretty tight.
It's a trailer for the talk that's about to come.
So very long story short, about my third year in my PhD, I decided, okay, I'm done. I got to get out. There's no jobs. I got to start with Plan B, which now should have been Plan A. I love what I'm doing. So that's a very, very important part of the message. And then I started figuring out what my transferable skills were. And even though I'm a PhD in philosophy, I was a social scientist at heart. So I had research methods, and I knew how to do quantitative and qualitative research. And so combined that with some ethics and bioethics work, and I pitched myself to a market research firm doing program evaluation and public opinion polling for healthcare clients. So drafting surveys, creating program evaluation frameworks in the healthcare space. And so once I got my foot in the door, and that's going to be another theme for me, once you get your foot in the door, that's the most important part, right? Because then the PhD becomes an asset. It doesn't become sort of a hindrance. So that first step I always find is maybe one of the most difficult ones. And then once I was working, I set my sights on policy. I finished my PhD while I was working, which is very hard to do. I don't recommend doing that if you can avoid it. It took me many, many, many years to get done as a result of that. But I built up my experience in the market research space, making connections and contacts and networking as much as humanly possible, leveraging friends who were in other roles in policy and using their experience to inform how I was going to pitch and sell myself, and then set my sights on the CPSO. And I had to apply for a policy analyst job 3 times before I got the interview. So persistence, and I really emphasize that it can pay off. Because the 3rd time it worked and I got the job, and then I was able to climb the ladder internally from policy analyst to senior policy analyst, and now to manager. And that's my story.
That's a great story. Rafe, could you share yours with us?
Sorry, I was just answering questions in the question box there. That's great. So I guess I've been with the City of Vaughan for over 6 years now. I managed to start at the City of Vaughan I was finishing my PhD, so I started my PhD at York in 2008. I had substantially finished my dissertation by early 2014. And then I kind of started the job hunt at that point. I ended up defending in September of 2014, and I got a job, I want to say it was May of 2014, but it may have been June. I guess I kind of tell the story that I applied for, at the time, a 1-year contract in economic development to run a youth entrepreneurship program. And I kind of tell the story that they liked me so much that it took them 3 months to hire me, and again, they liked me so much, instead of offering me the year, they offered me 3 months. And what I found out a few years later was that there was skepticism around my degree and my level of qualification or educational attainment, and that they offered it to 2 other people, and they were just so desperate to have someone run this program with these kids that they brought me in. And I think so. In some ways, I got to start through luck in some ways. But obviously, once you're able to get in, I think, as Mai was saying, you can demonstrate, I think, added value once you're in, and if you're committed to the job, and if you pay attention to the necessary things like stakeholders and whoever else. And then once I was in, I started as a small business consultant running the youth program. I went on to do some policy work. Moving on to manage the small business group, and then and now, at least temporarily, running the department. So it's kind of a long way of saying I got in a little bit based on luck, and then once you get in, I think that there's opportunity to provide value. But at the same time, when I got into the City of Vaughan, this wasn't sort of the only iron in the fire. I was doing a lot of research on a lot of different jobs, and that research included talking to people. Most importantly, I think, talking to people, rather than just kind of Googling and looking up what organizations do, but phoning and emailing and asking what people did, and learning about those jobs. I think that's an important strategy. I would say that's kind of how you get in. And ultimately, when I got that job, I was leveraging experience that was, I think, parallel to my academic work. I had been involved in a not-for-profit organization and was able to claim some kind of experience in entrepreneurship and business development, which helped a lot. But yeah, so it's a little bit of, it is certainly a little bit, the skills you acquire doing a PhD will help you to advance quickly, I think, once you get in. Getting in, you know, unfortunately, you might need to surround those skills with some experiences outside the academy.
Great. And we'll give you a chance to dig in a little bit deeper into that in the next question. But first, I'd love to hear Visha's career story.
Sure. Before I start, I just wanted to echo what Mai was saying about the political campaigns. It's a great place to network and meet people. So my career story is a little unusual. So you know, I knew very little about networking when I first started, and I think that's kind of that was a hard lesson learned for me. So when I started off, I got a you know, a 5-week contract that I thought would help pay the bills. This was at a company called Municipal. And then when I was there, you know, similar to what Raphael was saying, like once you get your foot in the door and you bring your PhD as well, you can get noticed. So, so I started off on a 5-week contract as a customer service representative, talking to people every day. And then, you know, quite quickly was noticed for my research skills, my writing skills, attention to detail. In probably a year and a half, was promoted to management, and worked at that company at Morneau for about 5.5 years. And after which time, I knew I wanted to make a move. I knew I wanted to be in government because there, it's very immediate who you're working for. You're working for the people of Ontario and making their lives better. And so, you know, took that lesson that I didn't realize in the beginning of my career journey and networked and networked and networked. And I can provide tips later on when we talk about, you know, specific websites and how to network in the government. I have some good tips on that. And then, you know, the opportunity came up at the Energy Board, and you know, that's kind of where it landed up.
This is a really fascinating cluster of stories when you take a look at where your PhD started you from and the directions you took it in. For the next question, Craig, we'll begin with you. How did you get from philosophy and leverage that in the job that you're in now? It's, at first glance, it may not seem like that was a seamless transition, and yet it works really well. How did you manage to do that?
Yeah, so this is one of the questions that came up in the Q&A, and I've answered it already. My PhD is in philosophy of mind. I wrote on how people use concepts like belief and desire, and I built a new psychological framework for those concepts. Now I'm talking about medical and ethical issues. So there is a disconnect in terms of the content, but the skills are the same, right? So the skills that I deployed in philosophy of mind are the same kinds of skills that I have to deploy when talking about medical ethics and setting out policy expectations. So critical thinking, analysis, communication, presentation, persuasion, argumentation, all of those kinds, and playing devil's advocate, seeing multiple sides, like all of those things that you cultivate. So I always knew that I wanted to be in the policy space because I saw philosophy and policy as being related in terms of the skills that I would deploy and the things that I found value in. But getting there was the hard part, and getting there was where I tried to be a little bit more novel. So as I alluded to, I was doing you know, survey design and running experiments as a part of my PhD. And so I used that training to get myself into a market research space. And I even interviewed for jobs doing like market research on hip replacements. Like I didn't care what it was that I was going to do. I wanted to take a core skill that I had, like quantitative research methods, and apply it in a job. And I was willing to just get my foot in the door. And so I started doing information interviews with friends that worked in the space, or had them connect me with colleagues or managers to learn more about what that space looked like, what hiring managers were seeking in employees. And then that helped me do like a gaps analysis. So then I figured out where my weaknesses were. And then I went and did some additional courses at York, or through like the Institute for Social Research, or the sociology department, or going to the health policy department. And I just started to figure out what those gaps were, and then fill them, and then start selling myself. And so I must have sent out about 50 resumes or so before I started getting even any attention. And then, I have to say that luck is always a part of these conversations as well, and these paths that we have, because I ended up sitting in a room with a former York PhD who left her PhD halfway through her degree, finished it while she was on mat leave from work, and now she's sitting across the table from me asking me why I want to come onto her team. And so my story resonated. And it was a space where I could showcase my skills and tell her what it was that I was going to bring to that team, and she took a chance on me. And once she took that chance on me, then it was up to me to demonstrate that the skills that I said that I actually genuinely had, put them into practice, and then just kept pushing forward. So some of that was luck, but I remember the second interview when I was going to that company. The other manager was like, "Why do you want to work here? You're working on your PhD. Aren't you overqualified for this job? This is an entry-level job. Why would you possibly want this?" And then you take the moment of being fully like, you embrace the humility and be like, I may be on my way to a PhD, but what I need right now is like real work experience. And I'm prepared to start at the bottom and devote myself to that role and learn everything that this organization has to offer me, and just accept that and embrace that. So that was how I pitched my way in, with a little bit of luck, and then just kept working from that point forward.
That's pretty inspiring. Great story. Rafe, how did this play out for you? How did you go from your history degree to where you are now?
Yeah, so I think just from I think one of the things that you have to do right away, I think we all have to do right away, and I think the panelists are demonstrating that they did, was sort of disconnect their subject matter expertise from their skills, right? So yeah, I do have a degree, a PhD in history. My dissertation looked at a particular municipality and its development kind of in the late second half of the 20th century. So I was knee deep in my research in council reports and council minutes and council meetings. So in that sense, coming into a municipal job afterwards wasn't a huge leap, but it also wasn't something that I didn't plan on that. Like I didn't say like, okay, well, I know about the municipal world. It just sort of happened that way. But I think what everyone's talking about, and I would agree with them, is that you surround yourself with these kind of extra experiences, right? Like when I was doing my PhD, I mean, yes, I taught. I mean, we were all, a number of us were lucky enough to have, TA assignments and RA assignments and some course directorships and whatever else. But you know what? I always had a part-time job. I worked for a credit union in Toronto as a part-time teller through the whole thing, right? And it was always something that helped me when I faced that question that Craig faced, to say like, like I'm not. That's not all that I'm about, right? I'm not just about teaching and research and everything else. Like there are these other things that I do, right? So I think that's a big part of what you need to do. And again, I really think it is important to kind of decouple the subject matter expertise from the skill sets, right? And your interests. Whether I like, if you have a history degree and I looked at contemporary European history, what I was really interested in was governance. And what I was really interested in was some of the big questions around how does government interact with civil society, and then how does government and civil society work together and affect each other culturally, right? So that doesn't kind of show up when you have a PhD in history, but again, it can show up, I think, in some of the interests that you show and that you demonstrate. And again, you know, I know everybody's really busy. I mean, we all certainly were when we were doing our PhDs, but I think it's really important to cut out time to kind of round out that experience profile, for lack of a better term, right? And to round it out strategically, right? Like not just, I mean, you know, my dissertation was on a Portuguese municipality, so I worked for a Portuguese credit union. I used that to improve the language, to get to know the community a little bit better. But also, I chose a credit union because the credit union worked in the community. It did a lot of community development stuff, and every time an opportunity came up in that part-time job to, you know, whatever, hand out swag on a Saturday at a whatever, like I put my hand up and I was there handing out swag, because you see these community events and it links back to those interests, right? And then when you're in an interview situation, you know, you're not going to say, hey, I was handing out swag. You're going to say, you know, I was engaged in this community event. I was seeing, you know, there are ways you can tell the story, right? But again, you really need to understand kind of what drives you and the skills. And then you tell stories around those rather than I have a PhD and I'm good at history and, you know, whatever else. So.
Thank you, Ray. Well, spinning stories sounds like a pretty natural thing for an English graduate to do. Visha, what story did you tell to take you from an English degree to the Ontario Energy Board?
I think, and you know, we'll get into this later, but I think the networking really helped, and because when it comes to job applications and getting your your resume or something in front of someone, it can be harder because, you know, there's all these algorithms and it can be harder to sort of get your resume there. So the networking really did help to have a one-on-one conversation with people who were decision makers. When it comes to like my own personal career experience, I did find in the private sector, it was a little harder to spin my my degree because, you know, I found people, the whole overqualified, you know, shouldn't you be sitting under a tree reading Walt Whitman, that type of thing. But then once I moved to the public sector, you know, I spoke to a manager in communications at one of the ministries who said he had 3 PhDs on his team. And so it wasn't, you know, it wasn't surprising to him that I would want to work in communications or want to work in the government. So, so I think having a sense of that and was helpful to me as well. And then as well, you know, to echo what some of the other panelists have said, you know, my research was on diasporic literature and culture in Black and South Asian communities. You know, does it come up, you know, in you know, personal discussions? Yes, but does it come up at work? Maybe not so much. But what I did learn while I was doing that PhD was interpersonal communication, empathy, writing skills, research skills, attention to detail. And those are the things that you bring to your job. And those are the things that have to be highlighted on your resume and on your application materials.
Thank you. Thank you. Mai, how did you spin your PhD as a relevant and useful background for the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I don't think I needed too much spinning. I pretty much stayed in politics all the way, and I've been in probably every single government-related job there's been or there is out there. But I will say that when I started as a policy advisor, I thought this is what I wanted to do. And I wanted to move up in government. And then as I sat there and did it, I realized this is not what I want to do. And so from that experience, what I really took was, what were the things about specific jobs that made me happy or that would bring me the most satisfaction? And so I need to kind of work backwards, like what's the dream job? What are the steps to get there, and who should I contact? You know, and as I was going through this process, I realized that I really like socializing. I really like interacting with people, working in a team, not just sitting down and telling a story or just looking at data. And so I realized that politics, of course, is one of those spaces where you create policy, but you're also interacting with tons of stakeholders. And so I needed to find a job that would find or give me a good balance between the two, because I wasn't about just sitting in my office and working on papers and researching. So, you know, one of my suggestions is, like everybody else on this panel, your PhD may be in one thing, but you need to find the things that make you happy and figure out what that career is and find the steps to get there. So for me, one of it, of course, was government relations and being a lobbyist. And one of the ways to get there is to work in politics and to work with political parties and get that experience. So when I applied for this job at Shaw, the PhD definitely helped me, and don't underestimate the skills that you gain while doing a PhD. Don't think of it as just the topic. Think about it as the skills, your ability to mine for data, your ability to synthesize lots of data sets, and your ability to write clearly. Those are all important skills that you will take on to every job you go to. So don't forget those things. Don't think about it just as the topic, because my topic, I never even end up working in. So think about those skills, and then think about the things that will make you happy, and find the job you think will match that, and then work your way back.
Great advice. Thanks so much. Right, we'll begin with you with the next question. In your opinion, what part did networking play in your career journey? And what recommendations in terms of tools, tips, and resources do you have on how PhDs can network within your field or other fields? And what are some of the do's and don'ts you have for networking that you want PhDs to know?
Yeah, I think networking is really important. I think particularly once you kind of get in and start to figure out your niche within a particular field. I think that's, sorry, the problems of doing this from home, the phone goes off. Yeah, I think networking plays a huge role in terms of kind of where you're going to start moving in your career once you start to get in. I think getting in as well, it also helps. You know, information interviews were mentioned, and I think that's a great way to do it. I think doing it strategically is important as well. It's not just kind of a scattershot, like, you know, I'm going to talk to whoever. Some of the tips that I would suggest, you know, when you're doing these, you start to sit down and try to do targeted networking through things like information interviews is, you know, you might send 100 emails and, you know, one person might get back to you, and that's not bad. You know, that's okay, right? And I think, so I guess the tip there is just kind of stick with it, and a lot more people will say no than will say yes, and not because you're doing anything bad, just because they're busy and you know they're on to other things. In terms of tips on that kind of information interview, I would recommend at the end of it, always ask, is there someone else I can talk to learn more about this field? You know, because referrals will tend to say, you'll tend to get a yes if you say, you know, hi, you know, I know Mai, and you know, Mai suggested you were a great person to talk to, so I'm asking you to talk to you. I mean, that will automatically improve your chances. And I think, you know, stick with the information interview part, right? Like people do reach out to me for information interviews, and I can tell you, you know, the ones that are full on about, hi, I'm looking for a job, and I really want to work where you are. Like it kind of puts me off personally, but when people reach out and say, you know, look, I'm in a job hunt. I'm really interested in economic development. I'm interested in learning more about the field and about possible opportunities in the field. You know, I will always take that call because we all know why you're reaching out, right? We all know what's behind it, but I don't want to have to face that awkward question where they say, so when are you hiring? You know, the answer is always the same. Look at the HR site. You know, not much I can do there. So yeah, in terms of tips, information interviews, always ask for a referral at the end of it. And you know, again, just put on that research hat and do research. Don't go asking for a job right away, I think.
Great advice. Thank you. How about you, Visha? What would you suggest?
Yeah, I agree with what Raphael said. There's kind of this delicate dance when you're doing an information interview where you both know why you're there. I would, you know, search online for information interview questions, you know, that type of thing where you have some questions that you're going to ask the person. I would do a quick, you know, non-invasive search of their LinkedIn to see what their career trajectory is. So what I actually did was, you know, when I realized I wanted to get into government, I knew I had to start to meet managers, directors. And so there is a government website called Infogo, info-go. It's basically a directory of all Ontario public service employees. And you can search there by ministry, you can search by name, and it has sort of work emails and work phone numbers, which, you know, with everyone working from home, I would go by email instead. It's a really well-kept secret that it's totally okay to use an email address and cold email someone, just a friendly, I'd love to chat, I'd love to schedule a Zoom call or in person back in the day. But, you know, and so that's what I did when I wanted to get into the government, is every night, you know, when I was sitting watching the news, I would send off 5 emails and looked at different ministries, looked at the ones I was most interested in, sort of saw some of the, you know, the people that I wanted to connect with, and send out those emails. I as well kept a spreadsheet to ensure that I didn't send the same email twice, because that would be really awkward. So kept a spreadsheet, and my stats were I would send out 5 emails and I get 2 coffees out of it, which is 40%, which is not bad when you think about it. And so that's what I did. And then I would just update my spreadsheet with any information. I would send, when people were in office, I would actually send a thank you card mailed to their work address, as opposed to, you know, just a thank you email. I think that does go further. You know, it's a little more difficult in COVID situation, but I do think as well that networking in some aspects can be easier with Zoom, because someone who might say, I don't know if I want to give up my lunch, or, oh, I can't stay after work, I have to pick up the kids. With a Zoom call at lunch, or, you know, in their home office, is a lot easier in some ways. So I would not delay doing those types of info interviews. And this is one of those things that, you know, for some people, you know, there's been studies that show that some women find it more challenging, or, you know, there's some sort of gendered dynamics of it, but I would say it's one of the ways that people do get jobs. And so to sort of get past the awkwardness of it, and as you go along in your process of doing these intro interviews, you'll find they go smoother. You know what to say, and really the point is to make a connection. You're making a connection with someone who may be hiring a couple of months from now, 6 months from now, and that's the real point.
That's great advice. Thanks so much. Mai.
It's much more difficult, obviously, to network during a pandemic, but I would say everyone talked about information interviews. Absolutely. The one advice I would give when you go to an information interview, as Raph has mentioned, be genuine about what you're asking for. Everybody knows that you're there. Don't make it seem one-sided. And I guarantee you that people love to talk about themselves more than you think. So ask them about their experience, ask them about their obstacles. Just don't go there asking for a job. Raph is right. It's off-putting. So be genuine about it, and be genuine about building that relationship with the person. When I've had students come and chat with me, I found that the ones I really connected with were the ones who just wanted to have a conversation, and then who wanted some advice. And I was happy to provide that advice because I couldn't necessarily provide a job. And then the other thing I would say is with those information interviews, follow up afterwards, exactly like what Visha said. Send a thank you card, tell them that you took some of their advice. People like knowing that. They like knowing that they've spent the hour with you and that you took their advice into consideration. And that's a great way to build a network and to continue to build that network. Again, my advice, volunteer, go to conferences, go to events in your industry, do those things. Volunteering is key to building the network. Because it gives you an ability to display your skill set in terms of organization, commitment, other skills. And that's where you meet a lot of people and you can tell your story and you can ask them about theirs. So I think those would be my pieces of advice for networking.
Great. And Craig, it's always hardest to go up the fourth after three people have already said a bunch of things, but do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I got my first job without networking. I used networking to do information interviews to learn about the space and to understand what it was that I was going after. But then I got the job the good old-fashioned way by sending a resume and cover letter off into the abyss and hoping somebody read it. And even with networking and having a contact at the organization I'm at now, it still took me 3 tries to get the job because I wasn't the right person at the time each time. So networking is absolutely important and essential, but it's also not the only way to get the job, and it's not always sufficient to get the job. But I have now been on the receiving end of more information interviews than I can count. The number of people who reach out and ask to do information interviews is quite significant, but I always take them because I know how hard it is to navigate the space. And if they come forward genuinely and ask the right kinds of questions, I'm always happy to take them. But have that genuine interaction and ask, have it be meaningful enough to me that I want to do it, right? So I've already seen a few LinkedIn requests come to my phone from a part of this panel. That's great, but customize those requests, right? Don't just send in like a blanket, I want to connect with you. Explain why you want to connect with me, and then I'll be more likely to be receptive to it. I've done a number of talks in this space, and people have sent me like really passionate like messages saying, I really appreciated the advice that you gave. Here's my situation. If there's anything more you can provide, and I'll jump on the phone with them and provide some feedback and provide some ideas. So we're here, and we're here to help because other people helped us. Maybe one last point is that networking is not just with other organizations. It's also once you're within an organization, right? So I can't tell you the number of times we've poached from other departments in our organization. People got their foot in the door in a more entry-level position, and then I sat back and I watched, and we saw what was happening, and then we said, okay, now you come over and work on my team. We want you to come. So that's networking within an organization as well, which is just as important once you get your foot in.
Great advice. Okay, Visha, let's begin with you this time. What advice do you have for PhDs who are looking to apply in your company or your industry? What should they be marketing? What skills should they be gaining or improving while they're in their PhD? And what tips do you have for PhDs who don't have relevant experience in their fields of interest?
So one of the things I would say is as you start to look at job postings, to be really careful and really take in the language that's being used. Just like in our respective doctorates, we had certain phrasing, certain terminology that we used in our research. It's very similar to the working world. So as you're applying for jobs, I would even like copy and paste, create some Word docs to save those postings so you know what you should be talking about. And then, one of the lucky things about being, a PhD or a postdoc is that we know how to learn. We spent a lot of time learning. So sort of to take on that your job search in the same way, in a methodical way, create spreadsheets, create lists of things you want to learn about. One of the things I would say is key to the working world, and I know it was new for me as someone in English, was knowing all of the Microsoft Office suite really well, having experience in Outlook, having experience with PowerPoint, which I didn't really use very much prior, Excel. Another thing I would say that's really important is being active on LinkedIn. So having a LinkedIn profile, having a good profile, do some research to find out what makes a good LinkedIn profile, get that nice photograph. And then, there are ways that you can kind of make an excellent LinkedIn profile, including something like recommendations. So having previous people you worked with recommend you. I myself have like 5 or 6 recommendations, and I give them out to people I work with because it just adds that extra element on a LinkedIn profile. And then, I liken LinkedIn to, being at a party. You don't want to be the person at the party who's like sort of sitting in the corner, not doing anything. You want to interact with people, repost things. People I know who are job searching will actually post, write articles and post articles on LinkedIn. So just to sort of create that communication with the people that you're connected to.
Great, thank you very much, Visha. Mai, what would you suggest?
For my role in particular, I would say that relationship building is 120% of my role. Maintaining those relationships and building them with government elected officials, government agencies, bureaucrats, and of course, people in your own business. So don't forget the soft skills that you also need when you are going through your job search. People connect better with people they feel, are happy, outgoing. And the one thing I remember hearing once is you might forget someone's name, but you never forget how they make you feel. So that would be one piece of advice, is to, in any job, it's not just about your ability to write, research, or do the job on paper. It's also your ability to connect with all your stakeholders and internally. So I would say that building those, and of course your interview skills. I was horrible at interviewing when I first began. I went to see Carolyn many times on this, and she is very helpful. I do recommend reaching out and building those interview skills, because it's not just about answering the questions when you're doing an interview, it's about telling a story. And the story is how you did your PhD, how you finished it, how you were able to overcome obstacles. Those are all important parts of the job. So I would definitely be able to focus on those things.
Great. And Craig, before we move to you, just a quick reminder, folks, this is the time to get your Q&As in, because after this round of this question, we'll be opening it up to you. So if questions are beginning to percolate in the back of your mind, this would be a good time to post them. Craig.
Yeah, and I'll just say that there's a ton of questions, and I think we've been answering them pretty furiously. But there's some of them in there that I think I'd like to address in this group as well, if we can, when we have the chance. I'm going to be very honest. My team is probably one of the largest policy teams in the health regulatory space in all of Canada. So without work experience, I'm probably not going to hire you. And the advice that I give to people when they come and talk to me is to find smaller shops, smaller organizations, not-for-profits that might be better suited as an initial starting point. I had work experience and most of a PhD, and it took me 3 tries to get in. We hired a PhD in a junior policy position for 6 months. I get about 300 applications every time I post a policy analyst position. So it is very, very, very competitive. And we are looking for real world experience. The PhD is like the icing on the cake, right? If we don't have the cake, then we've got a problem. The icing's not enough. And for my organization, a master's or a law degree is the minimum. So the PhD is not like the biggest distinguishing factor, right? So I would say you need to try to find an organization that suits you in a different way, because coming to a bigger organization, you need some more experience. So for me, it's looking for contracts. It's looking for smaller organizations with more entry-level positions. It's trying to find a place where your values align and you might be able to make a real contribution in a short period of time. It's about getting all of that experience and then leveraging over time. So that would be my tip.
Mute myself. This is hard to do with a touchpad, I got to tell you. Rafe.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, the experience question comes up a lot, and I'm often I don't know. I mean, I think it comes back to what I was talking about, kind of decoupling, your subject matter expertise from your skills, because I think, and it came up in the chat there. Someone was asking, well, like something is looking for 5 to 10 years experience, and I've been doing my PhD, and well, in my mind, like if you've been researching in that field and it took you 5 years to do your PhD, guess what? You got 5 years experience there, right? So, I think that I take Craig's point for sure, for sure. And it's about kind of the full package. But it's don't sell. I always struggled with, like, there's this tendency. I mean, like, graduate school is nothing if not a meat grinder, right? I mean, like it is nothing if not just like a constant reminder of that, frankly, there's someone who has more experience and someone's better than you and with more publications, always, ever. And that is just the fact of life, right? Like, it doesn't matter where you're going to go. So I think what tends to happen is, PhDs and postgrads downplay their experience as a PhD and a postdoc. And I think that's wrong. You are producing knowledge products. For lack of a better term, your dissertation is a knowledge product. It is a piece of knowledge that you are putting into the world that is moving the world forward, right? And I think it's really important that everybody remembers that. And the experience that you gain creating that knowledge product is valuable experience, right? So, first of all, like, don't sell your time in the PhD short, I would say. Surround it, like Craig said, like, surround it, and build it out. But first thing I would say is don't sell that short, but sell it properly. Don't come in and say, I have a PhD. Come in and say, I've been researching in this field for X amount of years. I produce this body of knowledge. I'm aware of these factors, etc. Right? Because that's experience in that particular area. So I think I would echo, I think, again, everything that everybody said. Wrap that experience. Don't throw that experience away. And I can tell you, at least in the municipal, so I kind of consider myself in two fields. There's economic development as a field, and I think the municipal sector as a field. And I can tell you, in economic development, when I'm doing hiring, or my team is doing hiring, I'm looking for a combination of three things. I'm looking for, first, an awareness of government. What is government? What is the role of government? I'm looking for an awareness of the private sector and how government and the private sector interact. And I'm looking for some sort of commitment to community, right? Because I think at least economic development is very much about community building, right? I want to hear that, you're passionate about gender issues, labor issues, whatever the case may be. I want to hear that something gets you jazzed up, right? So I'm always looking for kind of a story that fits within those, I think, three themes for economic development anyway. And I think for the municipal sector more broadly, I think that the municipal sector is a little odd in that it kind of does, like, there are engineers, there are philosophers, there are, it covers all there's archivists, like there's accountants, you name it, you know, you go to a municipal building, everything is in there, right? So it becomes this interesting place where, yeah, there was a hurdle around the PhD, but not a huge hurdle, because again, like, you know, most of the people in that building, they had their degree plus, you know, an accounting degree, or, you know, so some sort of postgraduate work, right? So it wasn't a huge stretch, I think, in the municipal world, particularly in bigger municipalities. So yeah, I guess just to summarize, this long way of saying, like, do not discount the time you are spending right now. It is valuable experience. Count it, very much so, and again, just kind of think about that package. And the last thing I'll say too is, because there have been a couple questions there as well about like years of experience and exact criteria on a job description. I've never met anyone who has exactly fit the job description, period, ever. You know, if at least in my world, if we say, you know, 1 to 3 years of experience, that's code for no experience, you know, like, frankly, you know, it's code for experience, but maybe not directly working for municipality, right? So, you know, like, it never, ever hurts to apply.
That's brilliant news, and a good tone to switch gears on. Now, Craig, I heard what you said about other questions coming through, but I think we'll open it up to the audience first, and after a little while, if we haven't covered some of the things that you're getting through your feed, I'll check in with you and see what you would like to add there. So Serena, at this point, I'll pass it over to you and Susan, and you can start going through the Q&A. Remember, you're looking for Q&As that are relevant to as many people as possible. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you. So one of the questions that we had come through, and there were some similar themes throughout other questions, was this skepticism towards PhD candidates and this idea of being overqualified for positions. So Maya, I saw that you responded by saying that, you know, some of the skepticism comes from, you know, again, people thinking that you're overqualified and perhaps thinking that you don't carry those soft skills that so many of our PhD candidates do. So I'd love to hear, you know, more thoughts from you and thoughts from our other panelists around that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of the stereotype that PhDs have when they're out in the market and out in the job market. And, you know, even when I started, actually, I take my PhD out. When I was talking to other people, my advice is don't take it out, embrace it. You've learned so many skills and you've acquired so many skills while it won't disqualify you from getting an interview. What will disqualify you from getting an interview or passing the interviews yourself? It's not going to be the fact that you have a PhD. If anything, it will help you get an interview, especially if you can, you know, describe and translate how those skills that you've carried through your PhD will now help you in this particular role you're applying for. So again, embrace it. And what happens is, when you're at the interview, it's your opportunity to dispel those stereotypes. Show them that you're able to interact with people, that you're able to make that, you know, that personal connection with somebody, and that you're not just somebody that was sitting in the ivory tower doing their PhD for 8 years. The interview is really important. That's your ability to dispel any of their stereotypes, and you will carry that through with you as you continue through your career.
Does anyone have anything to add to what Maya was saying in terms of how to assure them that you may have a lot of education, but that doesn't mean that you're overqualified for a position? Craig.
So there was a message that I ended up sending to all the panelists that I meant to send to the attendees. And it builds on a point that Raph was saying, like, grad school is a grind. And there is a lot to upsell in your experience. Like, I framed myself as a researcher. I had a scholarship, which helped to justify myself as being a researcher, but like, I framed it as I was doing real work. I was producing deliverables, papers and presentations and that kind of stuff. And then I also took opportunities I was the vice president of the Philosophy Students Association. I was the treasurer of the Philosophy Students Association. I founded the Philosophy Graduate Conference that York has now, and I ran it for years. So I did all of the event planning. I did You know, like I managed a group of volunteers to do all of the selection process and all that kind of stuff. So I just took grad school as an opportunity to find tons of ways to get different experiences. And then I played every single one of them up in my resume as strongly as I could, so that when I was applying for the 1 to 3 year experience jobs, I could pitch that I had transferable things that would move into that space. And so I replied to a comment in one of the questions saying, you know, depending on the level that you're going for, the more direct your experience needs to be, but the more entry level you are, the more transferable or lateral you can kind of make those moves, right? So if you're applying for a job that's super closely related to your work and your dissertation and your thinking, then you can probably go higher. But if you're moving into an entirely new space, be prepared to go more laterally or down and be more flexible in that way. And then I mean, Mai said the same thing that I have in some of the questions as well. Once you're in, if you prove yourself, you are going to accelerate. And the PhD will help you to do that acceleration. So it might be a little bit of a hindrance coming in, but you can explain it away. That's an easy move to make. And then once you're in, it'll help, I think move you forward.
Great insight, Craig. And I do tell PhDs when I meet with them that they sort of forget, once they've been in grad school for a while, that to get into a PhD program, you're functioning at the top of the BA pool, the top of the MA pool. Everything you've done up until that point, you've excelled at. So as long as you're putting your time and energy into something, you're going to do it really well. You just need to have the opportunity to show what you can do when you're putting your time and energy into something.
Yeah, I think I'll jump in there if you don't mind, Carolyn. And I think this builds on what Maya and Craig were saying. Like a good dose of humility as well is important, right? Like, you know, I know that and positivity too, right? Like I think Maya said it earlier, right? I can't remember what she said. You won't forget a name, but you might forget a name, but you won't forget how you feel out of that. I mean, a dose of humility, a dose of you know, just kind of, oh shucks, you know, just trying to make it doesn't hurt, right? I think I think that's important, and I think that just an awareness, like Craig was saying too, of where your experience best fits and how to tell the story about how your experience fits with whatever job, whether it be a government job or a private sector job or a not-for-profit job, right? You know, I think that you just I think need to remember that, and there's no kind of magic bullet to getting into government, for example. It's try again, and try a different way, and try a different way a second time, and you know, just try again, and be humble and be genuine, and you know, frankly, recognize government is full of people that are there because they believe in the community and community development, right? And my experience has been that it tends to be a really humble group, and a really a group that doesn't mind kind of being behind the scenes, right? So I don't know, just my thoughts.
I would say something as well about the whole sort of myth of being overqualified. And I think one of the things people outside of academia don't realize is the job situation. So you may go into interviews where people are looking at your resume saying, but why are they applying here? They can be a professor. Are they going to apply for this job and then leave to become a professor at U of T, or, you know, go off to the States or something? So, and I think this is another question that was in the chat box from Nicole Ritchie, where she said, you know, how do you positively talk about your PhD? And that's one of the things that's really important in this too, is one, if you're in the interview, you might have to sort of talk about the elephant in the room, which is of why you're here, but talk about it in a positive way. You don't want to have them, you know, crying in their chairs over the state of academia. But at the same time, you know, you can say, this is what I learned in my PhD. It was an incredibly enriching experience. This is what I bring to the table. Given the current situation, current job situation in academia, I realized I had to pivot, and I went towards an industry that I like, and this is why I'm here, and this is what I can bring to your organization or your company. That's kind of how I would frame it, because the thing is, like, other than us and our families and maybe our friends, a lot of people outside don't know the situation of academia right now, and that's something to remember as well.
Carolyn, you're on mute.
Great point, thank you. There's actually a really good book you folks can access. It's an ebook in Scott called So What Are You Going to Do With That? And it's particularly good at helping people negotiate to folks that aren't from the academy, what it is a PhD is, and dispel those myths and stereotypes that are float around out there. So what are you going to do with that? It's a great read, short read. It's one of my standards. I think Craig probably read it. Maya probably told you about it at one point too. It's certainly worth the time and effort to take a look at it. Do you have another question?
Okay, so following suit, Carolyn, we have a question around, is there a danger in spending too many years pursuing an academic path before changing trajectories to look for non-academic careers?
I would say if you are considering non-academic careers, then I would do it simultaneously as you are. There's no harm in doing both at the same time to figure out where it lands you. When I was finishing up my PhD, I applied to several, 1-year teaching terms as well as to government jobs. I interviewed for all the university jobs I applied for, and I got none of them. But I ended up getting the job at York Region as a policy advisor. So my advice, there's no danger, but there's no danger in doing both at the same time either.
Although it is hard. Craig's point in that is well taken. Anyone else? Too long?
Maybe I'll just add, I think if you are pursuing academic work and you are doing academic work while you are also trying to pivot, to the best of your ability, try to have that academic work be as diverse as possible so that you get different experiences and different skill sets, so that you can, instead of just saying I was on contract for like 3 years, you can say these are the different ways that I was teaching or doing work or researching, so you get a sort of a plurality of experiences, not just one type of experience. Because then I think it could be a risk. It's not necessarily a risk, but it could be a risk if you were sort of just, continually doing the same contract teaching roles for a number of years. That could be a risk in time. So more diversity would be better, I think.
And there's a lot of opportunities to sit on committees and associations at York. I know Faculty Council and Senate, they're looking for all sorts of graduate students right now to sit on those bodies, and it's a great way to find out how the university is operationalized and get how are decisions made and what is the data that counts in these spaces, regardless of what your major it is. It shows that you're starting to understand something beyond the confines of your discipline. Any other questions?
Yes, so our next question is a little bit of a loaded question, so I'm going to try my best, but it's all around advice that our panelists have for how to be a successful candidate. So we've had a lot of questions come in about, what to include on your resume and cover letter, and also about the testing components of the different hiring processes and how to prepare for those and anticipate those. And if you have any advice for interviews, you can throw that in there as well.
I don't mind. I like the loaded questions. I can handle that. So I guess in terms of letter and resume, I'll tell you, I kind of go back to my TA days. Like, I know in the first paragraph of a letter if I'm going to interview you. So, don't start with, hi, please accept my application for your job, right? Like, start with, hi, I'm really jazzed about something you do and want to do it with you. Like that's something. In terms of resumes, and this is this is purely a preference thing, but I cannot stand the skills-based resumes. I want to know, like, the last 5 years you've been doing this, the next 5 years you were doing that. Like, be linear for me. I'm not that clever. And I think in terms of the interviews and the resume as well, like every line, like in a resume, often you'll see like, you know, I did this from this time to that time, and then it'll say something like scheduling. What does that mean, right? Like problem, action, result, right? Like every line should have a problem, something you did, and most importantly, how it moved the organization forward, right? And it can be numeric, it can be a little bit of it can be qualitative. It doesn't have to be like rocket science. And then follow that into the interview, right? So take a step back. Frankly, I always recommend you take a notebook and a pen into the interview. Often they won't let you do that, but they'll give you paper and they'll insist that they keep it at the end, but that's okay. And, you know, someone asked the question, take notes of the question. Take like 10 seconds just to gather your thoughts, problem, action, result based on the question, and then get into it, right? Like I think a lot of people in interviews, and we're all guilty of it, I think just kind of start diving into the question and figure out the narrative as they're going through it, right? Where you'd be a lot clearer if you just, again, take 10 seconds. And you know, if it's a little awkward in the room, like you just say to people, look, I'm taking notes, you know, you're going to finish your question and, you know, it might be 5 or 10 seconds, but I'm just organizing my thoughts. And I have always seen that people appreciate that. So yeah, just problem, action, result, be specific.
Any additional thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm sure the Career Center has a lot of resources when it comes to resumes and stuff. So I would probably ask people to look at that. There is a website I like as well that's really helpful, which is muse.com, M-U-S-E, and that's sort of career building for millennials, younger workers. They have some great resume resources and some great cover letters on there that aren't so like stiff and clunky. You want to make sure that your cover letter is not just saying everything your resume says. So you have to have it be different. I have a way that I sort of organize my cover letters where it's by like certain like grouping. So like, you know, a skilled communications professional, and then so like in a bullet point form, which is more engaging rather than a whole block of text. And then I'll have 3 items that I want to talk about, you know, communications, management, and so on. So that's how I organize my cover letters. In the Ontario Public Service, so Ontario government jobs, the interview process is very specific. They come in with their sheets and they will not look up at you while you're interviewing, because the whole time they are taking notes. And so my first interview for a government role, I got out of there and I was kind of shell-shocked, like, what happened? There was no eye contact. I bombed that interview, you know, and then this is the role I ended up getting. So that's one thing I would say to be careful of when you're going for government roles, is to know that because there's so much reporting and tracking, they're going to be writing notes the entire time, and you're not going to get a lot of eye contact. So that's what I would say about interviewing and resumes.
None.
The other thing I would say about resumes is really look carefully at what they're asking in their job description and the job posting. Are they looking for management skills, organizational skills, your ability to do presentations, your ability to synthesize data? Sometimes you'll notice that their requirement on the topic, like maybe policy analyst in healthcare or something, they'll want you to maybe know a little bit about the field, but usually a lot of the times they're looking to see what the other skills you can to do the job, because you'll learn on the job. And lots of people know that. When I started in telecoms, I knew nothing about the telecoms industry, and you know, that's something you learn as you go through the job. But they were looking for some very specific skills, your ability to build relationships, to write proposals, make sure that you demonstrate that all in your resume. So find those key points in their job description and really make that shine in your resume. And that would be my advice.
The other? Great.
I have one more thing. I would say too, this sounds cheesy, but brand yourself. Make sure you drop a one-liner in there somewhere that really sticks with me. Like the last hire that we did, I'll never forget. And she's been incredible on our team. In her interview, she dropped the line, in the most humble kind of like quiet way. She said, "I'm an aggressive door opener." And I will never forget that she's an aggressive door opener, and that really, it suited the job perfectly. It was an economic development officer for foreign business development. And we needed an aggressive door opener. I just never thought of it that way, right? And she said that, and I walked out of that interview saying, like, that's going to be the one. Like I was sold right there, and I don't remember anything any of the other candidates said. I remember she said aggressive door opener. Have something that links appropriately to the job that is like catchy and will stick with, people like me who can't keep up generally. So.
Great advice, great advice. Also think about job postings, this whole process, more as an ethnographic process. You're essentially trying to gain admittance into a community that you're not currently a member of. And the most effective way of doing that is, of course, learning about the community before you try to become a member of it. So the more you send out resumes without that knowledge, it's a little bit like throwing darts at a dartboard. You may hit it, you may not. But if you've taken time to do those informational interviews, find out about the culture of the organization, really thought about how success is measured, what are their priorities, and then align how you tell your career story with those, you're much more likely to be heard and seen as being a good fit than if you said, here's all my academic stuff, you figure it out. I'm really good, trust me. That doesn't take you very far, especially if they don't know what that means. Do we have another question?
So following suit with resumes and interview, we have a question around how to gather references. So if you could speak a little bit about references, reference letters in the job search.
Like coming out of grad school, I mean, I'll be honest, it's a little bit trickier. So, I had, like, my supervisor was one of my references. I mean, the reality is, if you are at the reference stage, you're probably going to get the job anyway, unless something like totally wacky comes out of the references, right? So that's like the last bit in the puzzle. So if you've done a good job in your cover letter, you've done a good job in your resume, you've done a good job at the interview, and they're coming to you and saying, we want to check your references, you're probably in a pretty good spot. And at that point, it might not really matter, especially if it's sort of a lower level position and you're making like an entry into the space, that your references are your supervisor, your second rater, and maybe somebody else that you have some experience with outside of the university. And then as you start to do work, then start to pull in people you've worked with and complement that. Like I had a client, so when I was doing program evaluation and public opinion polling, I went to a client of mine after we were done the project and said, can you be a reference letter for me? And she was like, absolutely. And then that gave me the non-work work with my academic, and then somebody who was a client who could say, no, this guy was really great for us. And then that helps to propel you forward. So, it's never going to be a perfect science. I think this is something, as I was listening to everybody talk, I was kind of like, well, we all have our own preferences in terms of what the resume looks like, what the cover letter looks like, what the interview experience is going to be like, and then what we want to see in a reference. So there's not like a one size fits all.
And I think this is another good reason to volunteer, because when you're volunteering and you work with people, they see your abilities and your capabilities, and they become good references afterwards as well.
That's such a good point, Maya. I mean, you're more than PhD students. There's other things going on in your life. For instance, I live in a co-op and I'm on the board of my co-op. So if I was applying for a job, I could talk about that experience, which is very different than my academic experience. And all of us have aspects of our life that we take outside our immediate, how we spend our days regularly. So start thinking proactively about this. Who are the people in your life that you could turn to give more breadth, more insight to your career story other than the academics? Great.
But don't let not having what you think is good references stop you from applying for a job, please. Like I mean, to Craig's point, when we get to the reference stage, like I scan the notes on the references to make sure like it doesn't say this person's a serial killer, and that's about it. Like we've already made our decision at that point.
Yeah, it's really more of a confirmation than new information in most cases.
I would say as well, make sure that the people you're asking for references from know they're getting the call, know when they're getting the call. As you go along in your career, references drop off, so you may keep, you know, your dissertation supervisor, but, you know, drop some other people and then collect new ones. If it's been, you know, a year, and this is the time where you're supposed to sort of stay in touch with those references too. If you plan to use someone as a reference 2-3 years later and you haven't even talked to them in that time, they don't know anything about you, and then you're coming back to ask for another reference and they don't know what's happened in your career trajectory. So keep those references fresh, send a friendly email now and again, and make sure that they still feel comfortable being referenced for you.
A nice COVID coffee Zoom call. Another question.
So our next question is around transferable skills and experience. So one of our attendees had said that they think that one of the disconnects between academic work and non-academic work is vocabulary. So for example, qualitative research can translate into working in UX, and they're wondering what other examples our panelists have of academic activities translating into job functions that they've come across. And a second part to this question as well, which might be a little quicker, is besides your own industries, what other industries do you think are welcoming to these types of experiences and PhDs in general?
Thoughts?
I'm happy to give it a whirl. I mean, I think, you know, one of the big things about economic development is we work with talent development, and we work quite a bit with, you know, building the talent base of a particular community. And I can tell you time and time again, employers tell us that they need people who can communicate effectively. And I think it was Mai who was saying earlier, like, you know, they'll teach you about the telecommunications, like they'll teach you about, you know, supply chain stuff. But you need to be able to think, synthesize, and communicate effectively, and in a really broad kind of general way. So I you know, I don't think like, yeah, I think a lot of PhDs end up kind of in government or not-for-profit work, that kind of NGO kind of world. And I think I personally think that's maybe a little bit more cultural than it is kind of skills association. But yeah, I can tell you, you know, consulting firms, you know, and obviously, you know, the KPMGs or the PwCs of the world are kind of the gold standard of that. But consulting firms, you know, eat up PhDs because, and it doesn't matter in what field, for two reasons. One, because they can sell a PhD as a consultant, right? You know, PhD, wow. And number two, because PhDs are generally quick on their feet, good thinkers, know how to think strategically and think at a higher level, and can see the forest for the, you know, can see the forest rather than the trees, right? So I think there's no one answer to that. I think in terms of what sectors or what fields will go there. And then, sorry, Serena, what was the first part of that question? I did have a thought on that too.
So the first part of the question is just when it comes to academic activities that translate into job functions that you. Oh
yeah, the vocabulary. Yeah, the vocabulary thing is for sure, right? I mean, I'll never forget my supervisor at York. You know, he was really supportive when he wasn't like academia or bust kind of thing. So, but he always said, you know, on your resume for your TA stuff, you lead skills development workshops, right? Like you know, and that's a translation, right? Like instead of doing like TA's tutorial sessions, you're leading skills development workshops, right? So there's lots of that kind of stuff, and I'm just going to debunk things right now. Like that's not an academic to non-academic distinction. Like that is a field to field to field distinction. And I'll give you a real world example. The person who's now my manager of small business and entrepreneurship came from a sponsorships background. She never actually worked in economic development. So we have her going through basically an economic development 101 crash course right now. And her big takeaway is that like, this isn't rocket science, but now I have the vocabulary of economic development, right? And that's not an academic, non-academic thing. You know, that's just a sector thing. And I think one of the best things you can do if you're interested in a particular field is to start to get a sense of the vernacular and the vocabulary. And you can do that through professional associations. You know, if economic development is something that interests you, there's the Economic Developers Council of Ontario, Economic Development Association of Canada, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities has a number of white papers on economic development that will teach you some of the vocabulary, right? And because we're, you know, all fairly good at reading and picking ideas up, you'll pick that up relatively quickly.
That's such a good point, and it gets back to that ethnography of all of this. In every field outside of academe, there's a communication network within that field. There may be journals, there may be associations, there may be conferences, there's all sorts of PD. Find out what that is and get involved with it. So if you know the right terminology, I worked with one student one time who translated her TA work as adult education, which was more appropriate to the type of position that she was applying for. So rather than in big bold letters, I was a teaching assistant, she was an adult educator. And then she explained not everything a TA does, but what it is that you did as a TA that demonstrates your facility with adult education. Likewise, your dissertation is well framed as project management experience. It's very much the same kind of process. And if you can use that vocabulary when you're talking about it, it stops sounding less academic and more familiar to people who aren't part of the academy. Craig, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I want to build on that too, because I framed one of the things that I did, like, so as a policy person, like one of the things that I need to do is take this much information and distill it to this much and make it totally intelligible to people who may not actually know what it is that we're talking about in order for them to make a decision. That is teaching. Teaching is taking an entire, you know, segment of philosophy or history or whatever and taking it down to its bare bits and helping other people to understand those bits so that they can then engage with that information. But I also want to put something else on the table. The people that I work with, none of them have PhDs, but they are among the smartest people I have ever worked with, ever. And that's an important part about this too, is that even if you're leaving behind academia, you're going to go into a world with very smart people who are very good at what they're doing. And they are going to challenge you in ways that you haven't been challenged before. So, you know, and that speaks to me for like the humility. So like you have the PhD, which is important. You've got all of those skills, which are important. And the people that you're working with have the same skills. And it's the skills that is the common denominator among all of the people that we're working with.
And some of the other questions, a lot of the questions that have come up is, and we've briefly discussed this before about experience. And it's like, oh, I don't have enough of work experience. This job is saying 8 to 10 years experience. You actually do. You have like 8 years of researching and writing during your PhD, and you have probably more if you've done your MA, you know, so those are years. And when I began writing my resume, that's what I did. I said I have 8 years of researching, 8 years of writing experience, because I did. I wrote my master's dissertation, I wrote my PhD dissertation, I published in journal articles. It's not a lie at all. It's just being able to change the way it's viewed.
And just one word about word choice. In unionized environments in particular, the word choice is critical. That's how they band the jobs. That's how they determine what the pay rate is for the jobs. So the words that are in the job posting, the verbs particularly, pay attention to those because they have to appear in your stuff or you won't even make it to the interview. That's how they do their pre-screening stuff. So being able to translate what you've done, your career story, using the vocabulary of another field is a critical life skill these days. It's something that PhDs are actually very good at doing once they know that they need to do it. Any other questions?
Okay, so we have a question from an individual that is getting closer to graduating, and they're wondering how to find that job stability and avoid the beginning job precarity, such as part-time work, contract teaching. So they really want to invest time in networking and in finding the right position for themselves based on their skills and interests. And they're really longing for that stability, but how do they kind of manage themselves while they're transitioning to that?
Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, sure. That's a tough question. You know, that's a really hard one. I was really fortunate to, again, like I made that decision kind of before I defended, and I started looking pretty hard. And I was fortunate enough to find something, again, before I defended. But my fallback were those, you know, the part-time jobs that I was working in, right? So, you know, unfortunately, you know, the reality is that, yeah, precarity, and particularly in COVID, right? Like, you know, we're all patting ourselves on the back because our unemployment rate is now down to 9%, right? Like, it's not awesome, guys. But we're all, you know, super happy about that because it's getting better. And I think, yeah, it's a big challenge, and it's a big challenge. Precarity, period, is a big challenge that I think, you know, policymakers and governments are trying to grapple with. There's no good answer to it. It's just, you know, a little bit at a time. And for your specific situations, you know, I don't think that's a problem that is specific to, you know, PhDs transitioning into non-academic work. You know, that I think that's a much bigger societal problem that I could get on a soapbox for a while about, but I think it's a challenge, and I think, you know, whether I like it or not, whether we like it or not, it's in some ways a reality, and making ends meet is really tough. But I think I would take the optimistic approach to this, right? To say that, you know, if nothing else, we've all, and you have all demonstrated that you're good researchers, like Carolyn was saying, like you have. Whatever you've done, you tend to keep excelling, right? Because you're where you are, right? So I think if we take some of that some of that creativity and some of that brain power and apply it to that problem, you know, there are, yeah, we're in. I hate to say it, we're in better situations than some, right? So I think. Unfortunately, there's kind of no good answer other than just it's a reality, and you deal with it as absolutely best you can. You know, unfortunately.
May.
It's true. You may think that you're in a job and there's job security, but you never know what happens, right? So I don't like to think of every job as being secure, because they're not. When I was political staff, we had about 1.5 years left in the mandate. 6 months in, I saw the writing on the wall, and as soon as my government's out, we're out of jobs, you know. And just because you finish your PhD and you're finding yourself in another job doesn't mean that there's job security. So don't look at it as looking for job security. I would think of it as looking for other opportunities after the job. So for example, when I was in politics and we were 6 months out into an election, and I was like, okay, well, I need to find what's my next opportunity. So I created an opportunity. I found a lobbying firm. I pitched them on some ideas I had, and they weren't actively looking for someone, but they liked my ideas. And, 2 months later, I found myself in a job before the election. So, always think about what the next opportunity is going to be. Don't think that everything is safe, because it's not. You never know.
Great.
So my first job, a year in, we lost a major client. And then I get pulled into an office and they're like, we have to let you go, Craig. And here I thought I had a permanent full-time role. It just so happened that a teammate of mine quit that day. And so I got my job back before the end of business day. And that is just the wild ride that you take working. So just sharing that as a point to what Mai was saying.
Yeah, Visha.
I wanted to say as well, the part of my career trajectory that fell off of my initial answer were, sustenance jobs. So, working a few part-time jobs that are definitely not on my resume. And while I was doing that, in pastry, so I was working as a pastry cook. But while I was doing that, I was doing a part-time communications internship. So, there may be those times where you're working those jobs that aren't going to end up on your resume, but try to make sure you are doing something that you can keep there. So yeah, there were times where I was working 2 jobs and a communications internship, and then leverage the communications internship, into my role in consumer relations. So, these things can happen. I know in some ways the panel may look very lucky in terms of where we are, but there were those times as well where we had to deal with probably precarious situations, and it can be challenging for sure. So I do empathize.
And very often, especially again in unionized environments, if you don't have relevant work experience, you're unlikely to start with a permanent full-time job. It's almost always going to start with a series of contracts where you build your credentials, you build your track record, you build your relevant reference base. And then from then, once you're sort of a proven entity, you're more likely to land up in a full-time job. And that happens in academia too. That's why we have the tenure track. They've got like a good 5, 6, 7 years to let you go if you're not turning out to be what they are. Now in the quote unquote, the real world, it tends not to be quite that long, but there's almost always a period of time it's like an audition. And it's an audition both ways, not just for the company or the organization to get a sense of you, but for you to get a sense of this. Is somebody was saying this earlier, it was the wrong culture. It wasn't a good cultural fit. And I know for a PhD to finally be above the poverty line is such a compelling thing to want to go for. But honestly, the ones I've talked to, once they've been able to pay their bills for a few years, pretty soon the paycheck just isn't enough. So if it's not something you're personally invested in, if you're not growing and developing in new and exciting ways, you're going to outgrow the job very, very quickly. So this think of it as a speed dating. You're just going through a period of trying on contracts, learning more about the field, learning about the vocabulary of the field, getting a sense of what's changing, what's working, what's not working, and that's where your creative, intelligent, analytical mind will start connecting things. Well, what about this, and how about that, and you start making suggestions, and people go, oh, you're an innovative thinker, and maybe you're somebody that we can invest a little bit more in. So I know you want that permanent job right away, but do not discount the value, the long-term value of a series of contracts as you build up, quote unquote, your street cred.
Oh, Carolyn, you're on mute.
Any other questions?
Yes, so this question is around the frustrations of applying for jobs with having the qualifications that are necessary for the job, but still not hearing anything back. So we all know that, applying for a job and being a successful candidate is a blend of what you know, who you know, and also a little bit of luck. So what advice do you have for job seekers who are, getting really frustrated because they're not hearing anything back?
I would say just keep plugging away. If I sat and counted how many resumes I sent out, I would be sitting here for quite a long time, especially in the beginning of my job search. Just keep plugging away and, you know, look for all of those opportunities. They're posted in many, many places. Sometimes they're not even posted on LinkedIn, but also remember, which I went through a lot, is sometimes the organizations just have to post the job. They already have a candidate in mind, unfortunately, and you're going to go through that unfortunate process. But my takeaway about those experiences is it was a learning experience for you. This was practice for you at another job interview. So don't think of it as being discouraging. Every job interview you take and you have is one step closer to the job that you should be at.
So I've been fully and completely qualified for jobs that I've applied for and never heard anything. And that's with work experience and a PhD. So it is 100% the experience of every job applicant, not just PhDs trying to make the transition. So it's nothing personal and nothing against you. And as I started off my story, I had sent out at least 50 resumes before I even started hearing anything, just when I was trying to get going. And I know, and that might have been in the good times when there were more jobs. So it might be a little bit harder now. And so perseverance and humility and not taking it personally and taking each opportunity to grow, to change your resume, to change your cover letter, to find learnings, to take every experience as growth and every failure as an opportunity to do better. That's sort of like the only way to go through it. And read the book. So what are you going to do with that? Because when I was really having a hard time, I would just pick it up and reread it. And it just made me remember that it'll be okay and you'll get through it.
So I would say, you know, applying for jobs can be really challenging, especially if you're putting in those dozens and dozens of applications. What can be helpful is creating a schedule for yourself in the day. If you spend even a couple of days, you know, spending the whole time on job applications, you're going to go a little bonkers. So, you know, creating that schedule where, you know, I apply for jobs from this time to this time, or I do the research in the morning, I sent out 5 applications in the afternoon, I go for a walk at lunchtime. There was something on LinkedIn that had, you know, sort of the perfect day in someone who's job seeking, and it included professionalization. It included sending out emails for coffee chats, and, you know, maybe 1 or 2 hours in that time was actually sending out the applications. And then the thing I would say as well is, you know, realize that it can be a challenging time. So you need to be really active in maintaining your mental health. Take the evenings off. Don't be scrolling LinkedIn at, you know, 12 o'clock at night, looking for job applications. Watch a movie, you know, go for a walk, relax with friends. This is part of, this is an integral part of job seeking, is making sure that you take care of your mental health.
Raphael.
Yeah, and I think, I completely agree with everything everybody said, and I think I build on one thing that Craig said, which is, you know, take the opportunity to learn, right? And I think that, you know, it's really easy, I think, when you get into this to kind of say, oh, you know, nobody understands, like there's some sort of, you know, magic box room back there where, you know, the right answer is for those resumes, and if only I could get into that magic box room, and, you know, those stupid people who aren't letting me in, kind of thing. Like, stay positive and be humble, right? And just recognize that sometimes, like, okay, but yeah, like, I haven't been getting called back. And the most frustrating thing about job interviews and job searches is that you get no feedback. You know, you'll be lucky if you get to do a debrief if you don't get a job, but generally you'll get no feedback, right? But I think, you know, just always be trying to be a little bit better, you know, and I think recognize that it's two sides, right? It's not, yes, it might be a lot of the time they might have someone in mind. It might be that, you know, the HR system just doesn't pick up the keyword that you're looking for, although at least at the City of Vaughan, we don't have that kind of, you know, spit it into a machine and look for the keywords. We do actually read everything, but sometimes sit back and say, you know, like, I'm not positioning myself properly, right? Or I didn't take the extra time to tailor my resume to that job,
Yeah.
right? So I think just 100% stay positive and keep plugging away at it, but recognize that, you know, there's two sides to the coin, right?
Great. Thank you. In a way, the term job search is a little bit of a misnomer, because if what you're talking about is finding postings and applying to postings, that's not a job search. That's a recruitment strategy. It was designed for recruiters, and it actually works for recruiters for the most part really well. It actually does not work particularly well for many, many job seekers, which is not to say don't do it. Of course, you're going to have to do it to get into some of the fields, but don't just do that. I think your point is so well taken, Visha. It is a demoralizing, dehumanizing, and depressing process to be working on applications and sending them out day after day after day and not hearing anything. Don't do that to yourself. Do it for a little period of time, strategically, in very particular ways, where the job or the position is something that's well aligned with what you have to offer, but then spend the rest of the time doing those informational interviews, building up your skills profile, doing good things for yourself, because this is also one of the last times in your life where you're going to have a little bit of breathing space, and you can go out for a walk in the middle of the morning and meet a friend for coffee at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So there's some joy in there too. The unknown quantity is perhaps the scariest piece, but don't limit yourself to just applying to online jobs, even during a pandemic. We are nearing the end of this session, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being here. I'm going to launch a poll, folks, and I really hope before you leave today that you take a moment and provide some feedback as to how this landed in your world. Did this provide you with the information you were looking for? The insights that perhaps gives you a little bit of hope and some strategies to move ahead with that you may not have had before you got here. And from all the students here, I cannot thank you folks enough for spending the afternoon with us, to sharing your career stories, your insight, your wisdom. It makes such a difference for a PhD who's never actually met somebody like themselves outside of academia to know that they exist and they excel and there's hope. And you've provided all of that today, so I cannot thank you enough. And this brings an end to our session. Serena, is there anything you wanted to finish off with before we left? Not so much? Okay, great. So this ends the session, folks. Please enter your answers into the poll. Expect the survey when you leave. That will also help us make sure that future events are more aligned with your needs and expectations. And thank you, panelists, once again. Have a great day, guys. Be well. Be well.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Everyone.
How's that? Pretty close to being perfectly on time.
That was great. Thank you, Carolyn. We're just going to wait for the rest of the participants to exit. Oh, great comments.
Fabulous panelists. I wish I had known a fraction of this when I was a PhD.
It's a really great discussion.